I was driving by my son-in-law's house and decided to visit him, but when I saw my wife's car at the gate, I realized that something was wrong. I quietly approached the window, and what I heard inside rocked my world. I couldn't believe my ears. The sun was low in the October sky, casting long, golden fingers through the windshield of Arthur Pendleton's meticulously maintained sedan. It was the kind of tranquil afternoon that retirement was supposed to be made of. The air, crisp and smelling of wood smoke and decaying leaves, was a tonic. He had spent the morning sketching designs for a new garden shed, a project more for the sake of occupying his hands than for any real need, and now the quiet hum of the engine was a pleasant, lulling companion. He drove without a destination, simply enjoying the winding country roads that unfurled like ribbons through the auburn and amber landscape. He passed the sign for Oak Creek, the affluent tree-lined suburb where his daughter, Chloe, and her husband, Liam, lived. A warmth bloomed in his chest at the thought of them. Chloe, his bright, fiercely loving daughter, had married well. Liam was a good man, ambitious, clever, and, most importantly, he adored Chloe. Arthur had helped him secure the loan for his marketing startup, a fact that gave him a quiet, paternal pride. On a whim, a sudden desire to see his family, he flicked on his indicator and turned onto their street. He hadn't called ahead, but they wouldn't mind. Liam was likely working from his home office, and a surprise visit from his father-in-law was never an unwelcome interruption. He pulled onto Sycamore Lane, a street of handsome, well-tended houses set back on generous lawns. As he neared their corner lot, a flicker of dark red deep in the shadows of an old oak tree caught his eye. He slowed the car, his brow furrowing in confusion. It was a Lexus RX, the deep burgundy color identical to his wife's. He coasted to a stop across the street, his heart giving a little, inexplicable thump. Eleanor's car. What was it doing here? His mind immediately began searching for a logical explanation. She was supposed to be at her monthly book club meeting across town. Her meeting must have been cancelled, he reasoned. She probably decided to drop off that cookbook Chloe wanted. It made sense. And yet, the car wasn't parked in the driveway, which was empty, but tucked away on the street, partially obscured by the low-hanging branches of the tree. It felt clandestine. He killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the unease that had begun to prickle his skin. He sat for a long moment, just watching the house. It was quiet. The curtains in the large bay window that looked into the living room were drawn tight, which was unusual for such a bright afternoon. He pulled out his phone and dialed Eleanor's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before clicking over to her voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Eleanor. Please leave a message." He hung up without speaking. Then he tried Liam. Straight to voicemail. The knot of anxiety in his stomach tightened. This was wrong. All of it. The parked car, the drawn curtains, the unanswered phones. It wasn't a cancelled book club meeting. A darker, more visceral instinct began to take over, a primal sense of trespass. He pictured calling Chloe at her law firm, but what would he say? "I'm sitting outside your house and I have a strange feeling about your mother and your husband?" He would sound like a lunatic. Slipping out of his car, he felt a sudden chill despite the mild air. He crossed the street, his leather-soled shoes making no sound on the asphalt. He walked not up the stone pathway, but onto the soft, manicured lawn, his footsteps muffled by the grass. He felt like an intruder, a spy on the grounds of a life he had helped build. Every window on the ground floor was covered. He circled around the side of the house, towards the back, his heart thudding a heavy, painful rhythm against his ribs. There he found what he was looking for. A window in the small study that Liam used was cranked open, just a crack to let in the autumn air. The gap was no more than an inch, but it was enough. As he drew closer, keeping himself pressed against the cool brick of the house, he heard them. Voices. Muffled at first, then clearer. His wife's voice. And Liam's. Relief, sharp and sudden, washed over him. They were just talking. Maybe Liam had a business crisis and had called Eleanor for advice. She was good at that sort of thing, level-headed and practical. Arthur felt a flush of shame for his suspicion. He was about to clear his throat, to call out and announce his presence, when he caught the specific cadence of their speech, the low, intimate murmur that was not the sound of a business discussion. He froze, his hand hovering in the air. "We can't keep doing this, Liam," Eleanor said. Her voice was a low, throaty whisper, laced with a weariness he recognized, but colored with an intimacy that was utterly foreign to him. It's too dangerous. What if he had come home? What if Chloe? Arthur's breath hitched in his throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He? Was he the he? Liam's voice followed, deeper, and filled with a raw emotion Arthur had never heard from him. What if I don't want to stop? He asked, his voice thick. Ellie, with you. I feel seen. I feel understood. Chloe, she's wonderful, but she loves the idea of me. The successful husband, the provider. You see me. The man who is terrified of failing. There was a soft rustle of fabric, then a sigh from Eleanor. It was not a sigh of distress, but one of deep, complicated contentment. A soft, breathy laugh followed. My brilliant, foolish boy, she murmured, and the term of endearment was a physical blow, knocking the air from Arthur's lungs. Arthur would be destroyed. Utterly destroyed. And Chloe. God, Chloe. We would be ruining her life. The words hung in the still afternoon air, obscene and undeniable. Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. A roaring sound filled his ears, like the rushing of a distant ocean, drowning out the chirping of the birds in the oak tree. He felt a profound, shivering cold seep into his bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. He stumbled back from the window, his hand flying to his mouth to stifle the cry that threatened to tear out of his throat. His mind was a maelstrom of images: Eleanor kissing him goodbye that morning, her familiar scent of lavender and vanilla, Liam at their wedding, his face shining with adoration for Chloe, the three of them celebrating Christmas last year, a perfect family portrait. It was all a lie. A grotesque, elaborate play, and he was the only one who hadn't known his part. He staggered away from the house, his legs unsteady as if he were drunk. The world had gone blurry at the edges, the vibrant autumn colors bleeding into a meaningless smear. He wasn't just betrayed, he had been rendered a fool. The patron, the supporter, the kindly old father-in-law, blissfully unaware as his wife, and the man he treated like a son carried on behind his back, in the very house he helped them buy. He reached his car, fumbling with the keys, his hand shaking so violently he could barely fit it into the ignition. He turned the key, and the engine's quiet hum now sounded like a scream. He threw the car into drive and sped away from Sycamore Lane, away from the House of Secrets. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He didn't need to. The image of the burgundy Lexus hiding in the shadows was burned into his memory, a permanent monument to the exact moment his life had ended. He drove, but he wasn't going anywhere. He had already arrived at the end of everything. The drive home was a blur of motion and color, a 10-mile journey that felt both instantaneous and eternal. Arthur's hands were fused to the steering wheel, his knuckles white stones against the dark leather. He didn't register the familiar landmarks: the old miller's farm with its grazing cows, the sharp bend in the road by the river, the town square with its quaint clock tower. They were objects in a foreign landscape, pieces of a life that belonged to someone else. The man who had driven this road an hour ago, a contented retiree named Arthur Pendleton, was gone. In his place sat a hollowed-out shell, a ghost gripping the wheel, his mind replaying the same loop of whispered words from outside the window. We can't keep doing this. What if I don't want to stop? My brilliant, foolish boy. Arthur would be destroyed. Destroyed. The word was too small, too neat. It was an antiseptic term for a feeling so cataclysmic. This was not destruction, it was evisceration. It was the feeling of having his entire past, 35 years of it, excavated and revealed as a lie. Every shared laugh, every worried night, every anniversary celebrated with champagne and whispered promises, it was all a fraud. He had been living in a beautifully constructed house with a fatal flaw in its foundation, and the walls were now collapsing in on him. He pulled into his own driveway, the crunch of the gravel under the tires an obscenely normal sound. The house stood before him, a handsome colonial he had designed himself 2 decades ago. It had been his masterpiece, a place of sanctuary and pride, filled with light and love. Now it looked like a mausoleum. He cut the engine and sat in the suffocating silence, the keys still in the ignition. He could just drive away. Keep going until the road ran out, until he found a place where the names Eleanor and Liam meant nothing. But where would that be? They were etched into the very architecture of his soul. And besides, there was Chloe. The thought of his daughter was a shard of glass in his heart. Her bright, innocent face, so full of love for the 2 people who were systematically demolishing her world. Finally, his body moved, a clumsy automaton obeying some long-ingrained command. He got out of the car, walked up the bluestone path, and let himself into his home. The air inside was still and cool, smelling faintly of lemon polish and the potpourri Eleanor kept in a bowl on the hall table. Everything was exactly as he had left it. A stack of architectural magazines on the coffee table. His favorite leather armchair angled towards the unlit fireplace. A framed photo on the mantelpiece of him and Eleanor on a trip to Italy, their arms around each other, beaming at the camera. He stared at the photograph, at the woman with the loving smile frozen on her face. A stranger. A complete and utter stranger. He walked to the wet bar in the corner of the living room, his movements stiff. He unstopped a crystal decanter of scotch, his hand shaking so badly that the amber liquid sloshed against the glass neck. He poured a generous measure, foregoing ice, and drank half of it down in one searing gulp. The liquor burned a path down his throat, a welcome, tangible pain that momentarily distracted from the inferno in his mind. He sank into his armchair, the one that had always felt like a comforting embrace, and felt nothing. He was numb, a nerve severed from the world. He didn't know how long he sat there, staring into the empty fireplace as the light outside faded from gold to a bruised purple. He just sat, the glass growing heavy in his hand, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He was waiting. He was a sentry on duty, waiting for the enemy to return to the barracks. The sound of the garage door rumbling open was a physical shock, jolting him from his stupor. A few moments later, he heard the back door click shut, followed by the familiar sound of her keys clattering into the ceramic dish on the kitchen counter. Her footsteps were light on the hardwood floor. "Arthur? Darling, are you home?" Her voice, a melodic, cheerful sound, drifted into the living room. It was the voice of a woman coming home to her husband after an afternoon with friends. It was the most monstrous sound he had ever heard. She appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright kitchen light. She was beautiful, even after all these years. Her silver blonde hair was impeccably styled, her makeup flawless. She wore a stylish cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. She looked elegant, composed, and utterly fraudulent. "There you are," she said, her smile warm and practiced. "Sitting in the dark? Is everything all right?" She flicked on a lamp, and the soft light illuminated his face. He quickly schooled his features into a mask of placid neutrality. "Just thinking," he said. His own voice sounded distant, as if it were coming from across a great chasm. "Oh, you and your thinking." She came over, leaning down to kiss him on the cheek. Her perfume, the same scent she'd worn for a decade, was suffocating. He flinched internally but remained perfectly still, a statue of a husband. "The book club was dreadful today," she announced, moving to the bar to pour herself a small glass of white wine. Brenda went on and on about some dense historical novel that nobody else had finished. "I swear, the woman just likes to hear herself talk." He watched her, this actress, as she delivered her lines with flawless precision. He saw the slight flush on her cheeks, the brightness in her eyes. It wasn't from debating a historical novel. It was the afterglow of an illicit afternoon, the lingering thrill of a tryst with her daughter's husband. The lie was so effortless, so practiced. How many times had she done this? How many afternoons had he sat here, believing she was discussing literature, when she was in the arms of another man? A boy. Her boy. "Sounds tedious," he managed to say. "Utterly," she agreed, taking a sip of her wine. She came and perched on the arm of his chair, her free hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Her touch felt like a brand. He wanted to recoil, to scream at her to get her hands off him, but he was paralyzed. The confrontation he had imagined, a storm of rage and accusations, now seemed impossible. The reality of it was too vast, too terrifying. To start that conversation was to light a match to their entire life. "You're quiet tonight," she observed, her fingers gently stroking his collar. "Did you have a nice drive?" "It was fine," he said, his voice clipped. "Just drove around." "Well, you missed a call from Chloe. She said Liam got the final paperwork through for the Henderson project. They're celebrating. She was hoping we could all go out to dinner this weekend to mark the occasion." The casual mention of Liam's name was another physical blow. She spoke of him with such ease, weaving him into the tapestry of their family life as if nothing were amiss. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it stole his breath. He was being asked to celebrate the success of the man who was sleeping with his wife. The man whose success he had bankrolled. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid in his mouth. "That's good news," he said, the words feeling like stones in his throat. He looked up at her then, truly looked at her. He studied the familiar lines around her eyes, the curve of her lips, the way she tilted her head when she was listening. He searched for some sign, some flicker of guilt or unease, some crack in the perfect facade. But there was nothing. Only the placid, loving expression of his wife of 35 years. And in that moment he understood the true depth of the betrayal. It wasn't just the affair. It was this chilling ability to stand in their home, to touch him, to lie to his face with such profound and absolute conviction. The woman he had married, the woman he thought he knew better than he knew himself, did not exist. She had been replaced by this stranger, this masterful deceiver. And he was utterly, terrifyingly alone with her in the house he had built. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological torture. Arthur and Eleanor moved through the familiar choreography of their shared life, but a pane of thick, soundproof glass had descended between them. He watched her make coffee in the morning, her movements fluid and unburdened, and wondered if she was thinking of him. He listened to her recount anecdotes from her day, searching for the tells in her performance, the subtle cracks in her story. There were none. She was flawless. The deception was so deeply ingrained it had become her nature. He, on the other hand, was a terrible actor. His smiles felt like grimaces. His laughter was hollow. He would find himself staring into space mid-sentence, the overheard conversation from Liam's study roaring back into his ears. He was jumpy and irritable, and he could see the flicker of confusion and perhaps annoyance in Eleanor's eyes. "Arthur, for heaven's sake, you've been pacing for 10 minutes. Is something on your mind?" she asked one evening, looking up from her book. "Just restless," he'd mumbled, the lie tasting like ash. "Thinking about the garden shed." It was a lie that bought him time, a lie that allowed him to retreat into the one place in the house that still felt like his own, his study. It was a room of order, lined with books on structural engineering and architectural history. His large drafting table stood in the center, a relic from his working days that he now used for his hobbyist sketches. It was a room of logic and precision, and it was here that he began his desperate, painful excavation of the past. The initial shock had calcified into a gnawing, obsessive need to understand. When had it begun? How had he, a man who prided himself on his attention to detail, a man who could spot a flaw in a blueprint from 50 feet away, missed the complete collapse of his own life structure? He sat at his heavy oak desk, a legal pad and a pen before him, and tried to think. He closed his eyes, pushing away the image of Eleanor's car in the shadows, and tried to travel back through time. He started with last Christmas. It had been perfect. Chloe and Liam had stayed with them for a week. There had been laughter, gifts, too much food. He remembered Liam and Eleanor in the kitchen, working together to prepare the Christmas dinner. They had seemed so comfortable, their movements synchronized. At the time he had seen it as the easy familiarity of family. Now he saw it for what it was, the practiced intimacy of lovers. He remembered Eleanor playfully swatting Liam's hand away from the roast potatoes, their eyes meeting for a fraction of a second too long. A jolt, electric and sick, went through him. He had seen it. He had seen it and registered it as nothing. He scribbled "Christmas, the kitchen" on the pad. His mind worked backward, snagging on other moments, other instances that now seemed sinister. There was the charity gala back in the spring. Chloe had been down with a nasty flu and couldn't go, so Liam had gone alone for the networking opportunities. Eleanor had attended with her friends from the Historical Society. Arthur, who loathed such events, had stayed home with Chloe. Eleanor had come home after midnight, her cheeks flushed, her eyes sparkling. "A wild success," she'd chirped, talking about the funds raised and the wonderful people she'd met. Liam was a star, by the way. He worked the room like a politician. Arthur had felt a surge of pride for his son-in-law. Now, the memory curdled in his stomach. Had they left together? Had they found a quiet corner? Had her flushed cheeks been from the thrill of the auction or the thrill of a stolen kiss? He wrote down Gala April. Then, a bigger, colder memory surfaced. The weekend in late July. Eleanor had gone on a spa retreat with 2 of her friends, a trip that had been planned for months. He recalled her packing, the extra care she took with her outfits. Around the same time, Liam had to fly to the same city for a 2-day marketing conference. Arthur remembered a brief phone call with Chloe, who had mentioned the coincidence. Isn't that funny? Mom and Liam will be in the same city. Maybe they can grab dinner if he gets a free moment, she had said. When Eleanor returned, tanned and relaxed, and he'd asked if she'd managed to see Liam, she had been strangely vague. Oh, you know how those conferences are, she'd waved a dismissive hand. He was swamped from dawn till dusk. We never managed to connect. The lie was so obvious now, so glaringly transparent. He felt a wave of nausea. A whole weekend. They had a whole weekend. While he was at home, mowing the lawn and thinking his wife was getting a seaweed wrap, she was with him. The thought of them together in a sterile hotel room, away from all prying eyes, was an image so vile it made him want to smash his fist into the wall. This descent into memory wasn't enough. He needed more than echoes and suspicions. He needed facts. He needed the cold, hard data of their deceit. And he knew where to find it. The decision to do so felt like a profound personal failure, a violation of the man he thought he was. But the man he thought he was no longer existed. With trembling fingers, he opened his laptop and navigated to the phone company's website. He typed in their account username and a password he hadn't used in years. After a few fumbled attempts, he was in. He clicked on View Bill, then Usage Details. A long, itemized list of calls and text messages populated the screen. He scrolled down to Eleanor's number. His heart hammered against his ribs. He felt like a voyeur, a common snoop. But he couldn't stop. He set the date range for the past 6 months. And there it was. A sprawling, undeniable web of communication. Dozens of calls to Liam's number. Texts exchanged at all hours. Not just during the day but late at night, long after Arthur was asleep beside her. 10 minutes here. 15 minutes there. A half-hour call on the day of the charity gala. Multiple calls and a flurry of texts over the spa weekend. He couldn't see the words they had typed or hear the things they had said, but he didn't need to. The numbers themselves told the story. The frequency, the duration, the timing, it was the secret skeleton of their affair, laid bare in columns of black and white. It wasn't a recent mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sustained, calculated campaign of deception that had been going on for months, right under his nose. He leaned back in his chair, the glow of the screen illuminating his stricken face. There was no comfort in confirmation, only a deeper, more profound agony. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of certainty. He was a fool. A blind, trusting old fool who had smiled and waved his wife off on her trysts, who had poured his son-in-law a drink while they both laughed at his expense. He closed the laptop, but he couldn't close his eyes to the truth. It was everywhere now. In the silence of the house, in the pictures on the wall, in the space on the bed beside him. He picked up the pen and, with a hand that was surprisingly steady, drew a single thick line under the words he had written on the pad. He was no longer just searching for echoes. He was mapping the geography of his own betrayal. A week bled into another. Arthur felt as if he were living underwater. Sounds were muffled, colors were dull, and a constant, crushing pressure bore down on him. Sleep offered no escape. It was a treacherous landscape of disjointed, anxious dreams from which he would wake with his heart pounding, the ghost of Eleanor's whispered words still hanging in the pre-dawn gloom. He lost weight. Dark, bruised hollows formed under his eyes. His transformation did not go unnoticed. Eleanor's feigned cheerfulness began to fray at the edges, replaced by a hovering, solicitous concern that was far more repulsive to him. "Arthur, you barely touched your dinner," she'd say, her brow furrowed in a perfect imitation of wifely care. "Are you feeling unwell? Maybe you should see Dr. Evans." "I'm fine," he would reply, the words a barricade against her false intimacy. "Just not hungry." He knew he was approaching a breaking point. The secret was a living thing inside him, a toxic growth that was poisoning him from the inside out. He felt its weight every morning when he woke up next to her, and its chilling presence every night as he lay rigid and sleepless, feigning slumber. He couldn't carry it alone anymore. It was too heavy, too corrosive. He needed to speak it aloud, to let it out into the air, or he felt he might simply implode. There was only one person he could trust with the full, hideous scope of his reality. George Miller. They had been friends for 40 years since they were young men starting their careers, Arthur the aspiring architect, George the pragmatic civil engineer. They had seen each other through promotions and setbacks, through raising children and burying parents. George's beloved wife, Mary, had passed away 3 years ago after a long illness, and George had navigated his grief with a quiet stoicism that Arthur had always admired. George understood loss. George understood the complexities of a long marriage. And most importantly, George knew how to be silent and just listen. On a gray, overcast Tuesday morning, after another night of torment, Arthur picked up the phone. He dialed the familiar number, his thumb hovering over the call button for a long moment. Voicing this shame would make it irrevocably real. But the alternative, this silent suffering, was no longer sustainable. He pressed the button. Miller, George's gruff, familiar voice answered on the second ring. George, it's Arthur. Art. Everything all right? You sound like you're at the bottom of a well. The simple observation of his state was almost enough to make him break. Can we meet? Arthur asked, his own voice sounding thin and strained. Today? I need to talk. There was no hesitation. Of course. The diner on Elm? Give me an hour. The diner was a small, unassuming place with worn vinyl booths and the comforting smell of coffee and frying bacon. It was the kind of place they had met 100 times over the years. Arthur chose a booth in the far corner, away from the windows. He ordered 2 black coffees from a waitress who had known them both for years, and then he waited, his hands wrapped around the warm ceramic mug, his leg jiggling with a nervous energy he couldn't control. George arrived exactly an hour later, sliding into the booth opposite him. He was a solid, square-jawed man, his face a roadmap of a life lived without pretense. He took one look at Arthur's haggard expression, his gray pallor, and his usual gruff greeting died on his lips. He simply nodded at the second coffee mug and said, "This looks serious." For a moment, Arthur couldn't speak. The words were log-jammed in his throat, a tangled mass of pain, rage, and humiliation. He took a shaky breath. "It's Eleanor," he began, the name feeling like a shard of glass on his tongue. George waited, his gaze steady and patient. She's having an affair." The words came out in a choked whisper, a confession of his own failure as much as hers. The shame was so intense it was a physical heat on his face. George didn't flinch. He didn't offer a shocked gasp or a clumsy platitude. He just held Arthur's gaze, his expression hardening slightly. "Are you sure?" Arthur nodded, a single, jerky motion. And then it all came pouring out. He told George everything, the story tumbling from him in a torrent of broken sentences and raw emotion. He told him about the spontaneous drive, the sight of the burgundy Lexus hiding in the shadows, the drawn curtains. He recounted the conversation he'd overheard, his voice cracking as he repeated Eleanor's damning words, "My brilliant, foolish boy." He told George about the agonizing pretense of the days that followed, the nights spent lying next to a stranger, and the final, soul-crushing discovery of the phone records, the cold, digital proof of a long-running betrayal. Through it all, George just listened. He didn't interrupt. He just sat there, his big, capable hands resting on the table, and absorbed the full weight of his friend's story. When Arthur finally fell silent, drained and hollowed out, the only sound was the distant clatter of plates from the kitchen. George let the silence sit for a long moment before he spoke, his voice low and serious. "The son-in-law," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a confirmation of the deepest layer of the betrayal. "With Liam." "With Liam," Arthur echoed, the name tasting like poison. A dark anger flickered in George's eyes. "I'm sorry, Art. I'm so damn sorry." He shook his head slowly. "To do that to you is one thing. But to do it to Chloe, that's a whole other level of cruel." Hearing George articulate the thought that had been screaming in his own mind, the thought of his daughter's unwitting role in this tragedy, was both a validation and a fresh stab of pain. "What do I do, George?" Arthur asked, his voice pleading. "I walk around my own house like a ghost. I look at her and I don't know who she is. I want to burn it all to the ground. I want to confront them, expose them for what they are. But then I think of Chloe. She adores him. She trusts her mother. The truth would destroy her. It would be like taking a sledgehammer to her heart." George leaned forward, his expression grim. This is the part that matters, he said, his voice firm. The rage you feel, that's justified. You have every right to it. But rage is a fire that burns everything, Arthur, including you. Before you do anything, before you say a single word to any of them, you have to ask yourself one question. Not what you deserve. Not what they deserve. But what is the ultimate goal here? What outcome do you want? He paused, letting the question sink in. Do you want to punish them? You can do that, and no one would blame you. But Chloe will be the collateral damage. Is that a price you're willing to pay? Or is your goal to protect your daughter? Because if that's the goal, then every move you make has to be calculated for that purpose. It might mean making choices that feel impossible right now. Arthur felt a profound, weary clarity settle over him. George was right. His friend's pragmatic, engineering mind had cut through the emotional chaos and found the core variable, Chloe. His rage wanted vengeance. His heart wanted to protect his daughter. And he didn't know how to do both. He left the diner an hour later, leaving a $10 bill on the table. The sky was still overcast, the world still gray. The terrible weight in his chest hadn't vanished, but it no longer felt like his alone. He had shared the burden. He had an ally. But George's counsel had also sharpened the edges of his dilemma, bringing the terrifying choice into stark relief. It wasn't just about a betrayal anymore. It was about a father's love and the horrific, impossible price of truth. The phone call came 2 days later, on a Thursday afternoon while Arthur was aimlessly tidying his already immaculate workshop. The caller ID flashed with Chloe's smiling face, a picture taken last summer at the lake. For a moment, he considered not answering, but the thought of worrying her was unbearable. He swiped to accept, steeling himself. "Hi, Dad," her voice chirped, bright and full of energy. It was a sound that had once been the purest source of joy in his life. Now, it was laced with a painful irony. "Chloe, sweetheart. How are you?" "I'm fantastic. Listen, are you and Mom free Saturday night? Liam and I want to take you out to celebrate. We booked a table at the Grove." "My treat." The Grove was one of the nicest restaurants in the city, the kind of place reserved for significant milestones. The manufactured enthusiasm Arthur had to summon felt like swallowing shards of glass. "That sounds wonderful, honey. A celebration is definitely in order. We're very proud of him." "He's so excited," Chloe gushed, completely oblivious to the lie her father was telling. "He keeps saying it all started with you, Dad. With you believing in him. He wants to thank you properly. So you have to come. 8 o'clock. The vice around his heart tightened. He was being summoned to his own crucifixion, and his beloved daughter was the one handing him the nails. "We'll be there," he said, the words feeling foreign and heavy in his mouth. Saturday evening descended like a gathering storm. The pretense began the moment he stepped out of the shower. Eleanor was in their bedroom, humming to herself as she assessed 2 different dresses she had laid out on the bed. "Arthur, what do you think?" she asked, holding up a conservative navy blue sheath against a more striking emerald green one. "Is the green too much?" He looked at her, standing there in her slip, a woman he had shared a room with for more than 3 decades, and felt a chasm of alienation so vast it made him dizzy. He saw not his wife asking for an opinion, but a co-conspirator preparing her costume for the evening's performance. He wondered which dress she had worn for Liam. "The navy is fine," he said, his voice flat. He turned away to pull a shirt from his closet, unable to bear the sight of her for a second longer. The drive to the restaurant was a study in suffocating silence. Eleanor, seemingly sensing his mood but misattributing it to simple fatigue, chattered on about her garden club, her voice filling the void Arthur refused to occupy. He just drove, his eyes fixed on the road, his mind a turbulent sea of dread. Each mile brought them closer to the ordeal, closer to the moment he would have to sit across from them all and pretend. The Grove was just as he remembered, dimly lit, with the low hum of civilized conversation and the clinking of wine glasses. A pianist played softly in the corner. It was a backdrop for joy, for romance, for celebration, a cruel stage for the grim play in which he was the unwilling star. Chloe and Liam were already seated at a corner table. They both stood as Arthur and Eleanor approached. Chloe was radiant, her face flushed with happiness. She wore a simple black dress that highlighted the sparkle in her eyes, and she threw her arms around Arthur's neck in a fierce hug. "Dad!" I'm so glad you could make it. Over her shoulder he saw Liam, smiling his easy, confident smile. He looked handsome in a tailored sports coat, the very picture of a young man on the rise. He extended a hand. Arthur. Eleanor. Thanks so much for coming. Arthur's hand met his son-in-law's. The grip was firm, the palm warm. It was the hand of a liar, a thief. Arthur felt a surge of pure, unadulterated hatred, so potent and visceral it nearly buckled his knees. He forced a tight, brittle smile onto his own face. Congratulations, son. You've earned it. The word son nearly choked him. The dinner was an exercise in exquisite agony. Chloe, bubbly with champagne and excitement, carried the conversation. She recounted the story of Liam getting the news of his promotion, her narrative peppered with loving glances at her husband. She talked about their future, their plans to start landscaping the backyard, a vague, happy reference to one day when they would need a swing set. With every joyful word she spoke, Arthur felt the weight of his secret grow heavier. This was what was at stake. Not just a marriage, not just a relationship, but this pure, untainted happiness. The blissful ignorance that allowed his daughter to dream of a future with the man who was betraying her. He watched Eleanor and Liam interact. To an outsider, they were the perfect mother-in-law and son-in-law, warm, respectful, familiar. But to Arthur, in his state of hypervigilance, their every move was incriminating. He saw the way Liam's eyes lingered on Eleanor for a fraction of a second too long when she was telling a story. He saw the small, almost imperceptible smile that touched Eleanor's lips when Liam made a witty remark. They never looked at each other at the same time, a feat of careful choreography that was, in itself, a confession. They were a team, and he and Chloe were the audience they were performing for. "And I really have to thank Arthur," Liam said, turning his charming smile on him. "None of this would have been possible without your initial investment, of course, but more than that, your guidance. You've been a real mentor to me." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Arthur could feel the blood pounding in his temples. He wanted to lunge across the table, to grab the front of that expensive sports coat and smash that handsome, lying face into the table. Instead, he took a slow sip of water. "All you, Liam," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You did the work." The evening culminated in the moment he had been dreading. Chloe, her eyes shining, raised her champagne flute. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced, her voice ringing with sincerity. "To my incredible husband, Liam. I am so proud of the man you are and everything you've accomplished." Her gaze softened as she looked at him. "And to my parents, my role models. Thank you for showing me what a loving, supportive partnership looks like. I'm the luckiest girl in the world." The words struck Arthur with the force of a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs. He looked at his daughter's beautiful, earnest face, and a fierce, protective love surged through him, so powerful it was almost painful. She was looking at a mirage, and she thought it was an oasis. He saw Eleanor raise her glass, her eyes glistening with what looked like tears of maternal pride. He saw Liam raise his, a mask of humble gratitude on his face. And slowly, as if it weighed 1,000 pounds, Arthur raised his own. He met Liam's eyes across the table, and for a fleeting second, he thought he saw a flicker of something in them, not guilt but fear. He clinked his glass against theirs. He drank the champagne, the bubbles fizzing like acid on his tongue. He was toasting his own ruin. He was toasting their lies. This, he realized with a soul-crushing certainty, was the price of his daughter's happiness. And its cost was his silence, his honor, and what was left of his heart. The celebratory dinner was the breaking of the dam. As Arthur drove home, with Eleanor beside him humming softly to a song on the radio, something inside him finally snapped. The sheer, suffocating pressure of his silence had become more unbearable than any fallout the truth could possibly unleash. George's cautious advice echoed in his mind, the question of the ultimate goal. And in the shadow of his daughter's shining, happy face, the goal had become brutally clear. He could not, in good conscience, allow her to build her life, her future, her family, on a foundation of such profound deceit. To protect her from the pain of the truth now would be to condemn her to the far greater pain of discovering it years later, after her life was even more deeply entangled with Liam's lies. The thought of it, of his grandchildren being born into this fraud, was a horror he could not abide. The charade was over. He would no longer be a silent, complicit actor in their play. He would become the director. He would control the narrative from this point forward. He knew he couldn't confront Eleanor first. Their shared history was a complex minefield of emotions, 35 years of memories that she would undoubtedly use as a shield or a weapon. The confrontation would devolve into tears, accusations, and justifications. It would be messy, emotional, and unproductive. No, the first move had to be precise. Clinical. He had to sever the head of the snake. He had to face Liam man to man without the buffer of his wife or the presence of his daughter. He waited 2 days, letting his plan solidify, letting his white-hot rage cool into a shard of icy resolve. On Tuesday morning he called his son-in-law's mobile number. "Arthur." "Good to hear from you," Liam answered, his voice smooth and professional. "I hope you and Eleanor enjoyed Saturday night." "It was memorable," Arthur said, the double meaning hanging in the air, unheard by its target. "Listen, Liam, I'm calling because something's come up. An old colleague of mine from my contracting days, a man named Henderson, is looking to invest in a few local startups. He's got significant capital. I mentioned your firm, and he's interested. Very interested. But he's an old-school guy, wants to know the character of the man he's investing in. I was hoping you could meet me this afternoon to walk me through your latest projections so I can present a solid case for you." There was a beat of surprised silence on the other end, followed by an audible surge of excitement. "Absolutely, Arthur. That's incredible news. Of course. My office at 2? "No," Arthur said firmly. "Henderson's very discreet. Let's not meet at an office. There's an old project site of mine out on River Road. The old Northwood Mill development. It's quiet out there. We won't be disturbed. Let's say 2:30. The old mill? Okay, sure. 2:30 it is. Arthur, thank you. This is huge." "We'll see," Arthur said and ended the call. The Northwood Mill was a skeleton. Arthur had designed the residential conversion project a decade ago before funding had collapsed, leaving it to the mercy of the elements. It stood on a desolate patch of land overlooking the gray, sluggish river. The air was damp and smelled of wet concrete and decay. Arthur arrived 20 minutes early, parking his car where it couldn't be seen from the road. He stood inside the cavernous, unfinished shell of the main building, surrounded by graffiti-covered walls and pools of stagnant rainwater. The setting was perfect. It was a place of ruin and broken promises. Liam's sleek black Audi pulled up precisely at 2:30. He got out, looking out of place in his expensive suit and polished shoes. He carried a leather briefcase, a hopeful soldier marching into an ambush. "Quite the place for a meeting," Liam said with a slightly nervous laugh, his voice echoing in the cavernous space as he approached Arthur. "A bit atmospheric. So, tell me about this Henderson guy. What's his primary?" "There is no Henderson," Arthur said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it sliced through the air and stopped Liam dead in his tracks. The smile on Liam's face faltered, replaced by a look of utter confusion. "What? I don't understand." Arthur turned to face him fully, his expression as hard and unyielding as the concrete floor beneath them. "There is no meeting. There's no investment. I brought you here to talk. I know, Liam. I know about you and Eleanor." The color drained from Liam's face. For a moment he looked completely stunned, his mouth slightly agape, as if Arthur had just spoken to him in a foreign language. Then, the first, predictable defense mechanism kicked in. What are you talking about?" He stammered, attempting a look of indignant confusion. That's an insane thing to say." Arthur didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His quiet certainty was more powerful than any shout. "Her car was at your house on the 14th of October. A Thursday afternoon. She was supposed to be at her book club. You were supposed to be working. I was there, Liam. I was at the side of the house. The study window was open. I heard you." He watched the lie in Liam's eyes die. The blustering denial evaporated, replaced by the wild, panicked look of a cornered animal. The carefully constructed facade of the successful, confident young man crumbled into dust, revealing the weak, terrified boy beneath. "Arthur, wait, it's not what you think," he pleaded, taking a half-step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "We were just talking. She's been unhappy for a long time. She confides in me. It's not, it hasn't. Stop, Arthur commanded, and the single word was so cold and final that Liam flinched as if struck. Do not try to explain it to me. Do not try to justify it. And do not, under any circumstances, attempt to shift 1 ounce of the blame onto her or anyone else. You did this. You stood in my house, you drank my wine, you took my money, you called me a mentor. And you took my wife, and you betrayed my daughter. Each statement was a nail being hammered into Liam's coffin. The last vestiges of his composure shattered. His shoulders slumped, and a pathetic, whimpering sound escaped his lips. I'm sorry, he whispered, his eyes on the floor. God, Arthur, I am so sorry. I never wanted. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. You never meant for anyone to find out, Arthur corrected him, his voice laced with contempt. He felt no pity, only a vast, chilling emptiness. This isn't about your apology. This is about what happens now. And what happens now is that you will do exactly as I say. You will not speak to Eleanor about this conversation. You will not text her, you will not call her. You will go home to my daughter and you will continue to play the part of the loving husband until I decide what to do with you. The next move is mine. You will wait. Is that clear? Liam could only nod, his body trembling. He looked small and pathetic, a ruin within a ruin. Arthur stared at him for a long moment, at the man he had once thought of as a son, the man who had shattered his world. There was no satisfaction in his victory, no relief in seeing him broken. There was only the cold, bitter taste of ashes. Without another word, Arthur turned his back on him and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the hollow, dead space. He left Liam standing alone amidst the debris of the abandoned mill, a fitting monument to the wreckage he had made of all their lives. The reckoning had begun. The day following the confrontation at the mill was eerily quiet. Arthur moved through his house with a strange new sense of calm. The frantic, desperate energy that had consumed him for weeks had been replaced by a cold, clear purpose. He was no longer a victim reacting to a crisis, he was the agent of its resolution. The power had shifted, and the silence in the house, once a symbol of his suffering, was now his weapon. He could feel Eleanor watching him. His placid demeanor was more unsettling to her than his previous agitation had been. She moved around him cautiously, her attempts at conversation. Comments about the weather, questions about his plans for the day, were like small stones tossed into a deep, still well. They sank without a ripple. He knew she was on edge. She was likely trying and failing to get a full account from Liam, whose terse, frightened responses would only be stoking her anxiety. She was a general who had lost contact with her soldier in the field, and she was beginning to understand that the war had turned against her. Arthur waited until evening. He waited until the dinner plates had been cleared and the dishwasher was humming its monotonous cycle. He waited until Eleanor had settled onto the sofa in the living room, a book open in her lap, the lamplight pooling around her and creating an illusion of domestic tranquility. The scene was so profoundly normal, so achingly familiar, that it felt like a memory from another man's life. He sat in his leather armchair opposite her, the one where he had sat paralyzed with shock just weeks before. He didn't speak for a long time, simply watching her. She fidgeted, turning a page in her book without reading it, the tension in the room becoming a palpable, physical presence. Finally she looked up, her expression a mixture of apprehension and annoyance. "Is there something you need, Arthur?" He met her gaze, his own expression unreadable. "I spoke to Liam on Tuesday," he said. His voice was quiet, devoid of accusation or anger. It was a simple statement of fact. He saw the immediate effect of his words. Her body went rigid. The polite mask of inquiry slipped, revealing the raw fear beneath. A slow flush crept up her neck. "Oh," she said, her voice a little too high, a little too bright. "What about?" "We met at the old Northwood Mill site," he continued, ignoring her question and letting the details of his statement land with their intended weight. "He was under the impression we were meeting a potential investor." Eleanor's knuckles were white where she gripped her book. I don't understand what this has to do with me." Arthur leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. He delivered the strategic, killing blow. "He told me everything, Eleanor. The lie was perfect." He watched her mind race, her defenses scrambling to find a foothold on shifting ground. She couldn't know what Liam had or hadn't said. She was cut off, isolated. The carefully constructed narrative she had prepared, the one full of justifications and shared blame, was now useless. Everything, she repeated, her voice a reedy whisper. What are you talking about? He's prone to exaggeration. I'm sure he misunderstood something. It was a feeble, desperate attempt at denial, and they both knew it. There was no misunderstanding, Arthur said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. I know you were at his house on the 14th of October. I know he flew to the same city you were in for your spa weekend in July. I know you both left the charity gala in April. He didn't tell me those things. I knew them already. The only thing Liam did was confirm them with his pathetic silence. Her face crumpled. It was the slow, agonizing collapse of a structure that had been under immense pressure for a very long time. The book slid from her lap and fell to the floor with a soft thud. The carefully maintained facade of the elegant, composed Eleanor Pendleton disintegrated, and for the first time, Arthur saw the woman who had been hiding behind it, a frightened, selfish stranger. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not the tears of remorse he might have once imagined. They were the hot, angry tears of being caught. So you've been spying on me, she hissed, her voice trembling with a nascent rage. Snooping through phone records, following me, after 35 years, this is what it's come to? It came to this the moment you got into your car and drove to my daughter's house to sleep with her husband, he countered, his voice still chillingly calm. This is the house you built, Eleanor. I'm just looking at the blueprints. Her anger deflated, replaced by a wave of weary justification. You have no idea what it's been like, she said, the tears now flowing freely. You see what you want to see, Arthur. You see a perfect life in a perfect house you designed. But you haven't truly looked at me in 20 years. I've been a ghost in this house. A fixture. Part of the beautiful design. You were always in your study, always with your plans and your books. I was lonely. She looked up at him, her expression pleading, seeking an understanding he no longer possessed. Liam, he saw me. He talked to me. He made me feel visible. He made me feel alive again. It wasn't supposed to happen. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake, but you have to understand the emptiness that came before it. He listened to her speech, to the litany of her loneliness, and he felt nothing. Not a flicker of empathy. Her pain, whether real or manufactured, was a paltry excuse. It was a selfish, pathetic monologue in the face of the cataclysmic damage she had wrought. Your emptiness? He said, and for the first time, a sliver of the immense, cold rage beneath his calm exterior showed through. Did you think of Chloe's emptiness when you were with him? Did you think of what this would do to her? Her, who looks at you like you are the center of the universe. Her, who toasted us, you and I, as her role models for a loving marriage. He stood up, the movement full of a final, irrevocable finality. Your loneliness does not give you the right to destroy our daughter. It does not give you the right to shatter her heart and her future for a few stolen afternoons of feeling visible. You speak of our 35 years together as if it were a prison sentence. For me it was a life. A life I cherished. A life that you have systematically and with great care turned into a lie. He looked down at her, this weeping stranger on his sofa, and felt the last, withered remnants of his love for her turn to dust. It's over, Eleanor. Whatever this was, he said, gesturing around the perfectly decorated room, it's a house of cards, and it's fallen. He walked out of the living room, leaving her alone with the ruins. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the ghosts of a shared past and the terrifying void of an uncertain future. The truth was finally out, a poison gas filling the silent spaces between them. And the most important question of all, the one that concerned the single innocent in this entire tragedy, remained hanging in the air, unanswered and explosive. What about Chloe? The days that followed were lived in the hushed, oppressive atmosphere of a tomb. Arthur and Eleanor were two ghosts haunting the beautiful prison they had once called home. They moved around each other with a wide berth, their paths intersecting only in brief, necessary moments in the kitchen or the hallway. Language was stripped down to its barest, most functional form. The mail is here. I'm going out. There were no pleasantries, no arguments, no tears. The great emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a vast, silent landscape of ruin. The only thing left was the chilling, unspoken question that hung in every room. What about Chloe? Liam, for his part, was a phantom. Chloe mentioned in a brief phone call that he was working long hours, stressed about the new project. Arthur knew better. Liam was paralyzed by terror, a puppet waiting for his master to either cut his strings or make him dance. The power Arthur now held over both his wife and his son-in-law was absolute, but it was a cold and heavy burden. The breaking point of this unbearable stasis came on a Sunday morning. Arthur was in his study, staring blankly at a half-finished sketch of the garden shed he knew he would never build. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. She had aged a decade in a week. The defiance was gone, replaced by a raw, pragmatic desperation. "We can't go on like this, Arthur," she said, her voice low and steady. "This silence is a different kind of poison. We have to decide." He turned in his chair to face her, his own expression impassive. "There is nothing for us to decide." "Don't be deliberately obtuse," she snapped, a flash of her old self returning. "I'm talking about Chloe. What good can possibly come from telling her? Think about it. Really think. It will accomplish nothing but destruction. It will annihilate her. For what? For your sense of justice? For revenge?" She took a step into the room, her argument rehearsed and urgent. "There's another way. We can bury this. You and I, we can separate. We can tell people we've simply grown apart. It happens. It's civilized. Liam and I, that is over. It was a moment of madness and it is over. He will be a good husband to her. We can save her, Arthur. We can spare her all of this pain if we just agree to carry it ourselves." It was the choice laid bare. A path of shared, poisonous silence or a path of solitary, devastating truth. He could become a co-conspirator with the woman who had betrayed him to protect his daughter from the wreckage, or he could light the fuse and stand with his daughter in the rubble. For a moment, the temptation of her offer was immense. The thought of inflicting that level of pain on Chloe, of being the one to personally deliver the blow that would shatter her world, was almost more than he could bear. He turned away from Eleanor, a clear dismissal, and faced the large window that looked out onto the backyard. "Leave me alone," he said. After a moment, he heard her footsteps retreat. He sat for hours, watching the sun move across the autumn sky, the entire 35 years of his marriage unspooling in his mind. He weighed the two options, holding them in his mind like two impossibly heavy stones. He could choose the lie. He could conspire with them. He and Eleanor would have their quiet divorce. Liam would remain, a cancer in his daughter's life that only Arthur could see. He would have to watch her love him, trust him, maybe even have children with him. He would have to attend family holidays and birthdays, smiling politely at the man who had cuckolded him, all under the guise of protecting Chloe's happiness. It would not be protection. It would be a life sentence for them both. For Chloe, a life built on a lie, and for him, the life of its silent warden. The lie would fester, a permanent sickness in the heart of their family. Or he could choose the truth. The brutal, ugly, catastrophic truth. The truth would detonate on impact, destroying Chloe's marriage, her relationship with her mother, and her entire perception of her life. The pain would be immediate and immense. He could picture her face, the disbelief turning to horror, then to a grief so profound it would hollow her out. It would be an agony of his own making. He would be the one holding the hammer. But what would be left after the demolition? The truth. A foundation, however scarred and broken, upon which something real could be built. She would be free of Liam. She would know who her mother truly was. And she would know that her father, no matter the cost, had trusted her with the most difficult truth of all. His gaze fell upon a silver frame on his desk. It was a picture of Chloe at her college graduation. She was in her cap and gown, her diploma held aloft, her face alight with a fierce, intelligent pride. This was not a fragile doll to be shielded from the world. This was a strong, brilliant woman whom he had raised to be resilient, to value honesty, to face challenges head-on. To choose the lie now would be the ultimate act of disrespect. It would be to say that he didn't believe in the very strength he had spent her whole life nurturing. It would be to decide that she was not capable of surviving her own life. A father's job, he realized, was not just to protect his child from pain. It was to give them the tools to navigate it. The truth, however horrific, was the only tool that would work. To love Chloe was not to keep her in a gilded cage of blissful ignorance, but to trust her with the keys to her own freedom, even if unlocking the door was an act of profound violence. His choice was made. The weariness in his bones was replaced by a grim, sorrowful resolve. He had to honor the woman in the photograph, not the little girl in his memory. He picked up his phone, the cool, smooth glass a stark contrast to the turmoil that had raged within him. His thumb moved across the screen, the familiar motions automatic. He opened his contacts, scrolled past Eleanor, and stopped on the name that mattered more than any other. Chloe. He looked at her name, at the smiling picture beside it. He was about to destroy her world. He was about to break her heart. But he was doing it to save her soul. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the air filling his lungs for what felt like the first time in weeks. Then, with a steady hand, he pressed the call button.